All right, so today we're diving into something pretty heavy.
Yeah.
That sinking feeling of realizing you might have married the wrong person.
Ooh, yeah.
We're going to be exploring a Reddit thread where people shared those moments of clarity, those aha moments that made them question everything.
It's fascinating how these stories tap into a fear so many of us have, right? Marriage is supposed to be happily ever after.
Right.
So admitting doubts can feel like confessing a dark secret.
Yeah, and sometimes that doubt creeps in early. Like one user on Nirvana talked about feeling happiest when their spouse left for work
Oh, wow.
and miserable when they came home.
Really?
And this was only a year into the marriage.
Oh, my gosh.
It really makes you wonder what happens when that initial honeymoon phase fades.
It makes you think about those early red flags we often ignore. There's this psychological concept called the sunk cost fallacy. The more we invest in something, the harder it is to walk away, even when it's clearly not working.
So we double down, convincing ourselves it'll get better.
Exactly. And in a context of marriage, that investment isn't just time.
Right.
It's emotions, shared dreams, maybe even financial entanglement. It's a lot to disentangle.
Wow. So walking down the aisle might be more like stepping onto a treadmill you can't get off of.
That's a bit dramatic, but it illustrates the point. Early on, that sense of this isn't right might be subtle, like you greedy one,
Okay.
who even on their honeymoon wish they could go home while lying in bed with their spouse.
Oh, wow.
It's like their body was already rejecting the situation.
Oof, that's rough. But sometimes it's not subtle at all, right? Another user, Umamaned, shared that while actually walking down the aisle, the thought that popped into their head was, this is the biggest mistake of my life.
Talk about a gut punch. You've got the dress, the guests, the cake, and suddenly it hits you. This isn't what you truly want.
And there's probably so much pressure to ignore that feeling, right? From family, from society. It's like, I've come this far, I can't turn back now.
Which brings us to another psychological factor at play here. Cognitive dissonance. When our actions contradict our beliefs, we tend to rationalize our behavior to reduce that inner conflict.
So you're basically twisting yourself into a pretzel
Yeah.
to justify staying in a situation that's making you unhappy.
In a way, yes. We start telling ourselves stories. I'll change. It's just a rough patch. Everyone has doubts, it's normal.
And sometimes it's not just doubt, it's a complete personality shift. After the I do's, Ethereal Lady Sybil talked about how their spouse became staid and boring.
Oh.
Like they'd already checked marriage off their to-do list.
Yeah.
What's going on there?
Well, one possibility is that the performance is over. Before marriage, there's this pressure to present the best version of yourself.
Right.
After the commitment is made, some people may feel like they can relax, let go of that effort.
So it's not necessarily malicious, just coasting.
Could be. Or it could be that the commitment itself triggers anxiety. Some people fear losing their individuality within marriage, so they subconsciously sabotage the relationship to maintain a sense of self.
Interesting. So those seemingly small changes, like being less attentive or less spontaneous, could actually be a defense mechanism.
Exactly. And those changes can chip away at the foundation of the relationship, especially if they involve disregard for the other person's feelings.
Like Stellar Pandemonium, who talked about their wedding reception as a turning point. They said their opinions suddenly didn't matter.
Wow.
Even something as simple as the music being too loud was brushed aside.
That's a classic example of how power dynamics can shift within a marriage.
Yeah.
One person's needs and preferences start to dominate while the other person feels increasingly invisible.
And that feeling of being unseen can be devastating. You fucking Gross shared a heartbreaking story about realizing they were trying to become someone worthy of their spouse's respect. Constantly seeking validation rather than feeling loved for who they were.
It's a common pattern, unfortunately. We enter relationships with our own baggage, our own insecurities, and sometimes instead of addressing those insecurities, we project them onto our partner, seeking their approval to fill that void.
Which is, of course, a recipe for disaster, because that void can never truly be filled externally. It has to come from within.
Precisely. And until we do that inner work, we're at risk of impeding those unhealthy patterns in every relationship.
So self-awareness is key. But sometimes the realization that something's wrong comes from comparing ourselves to others. Goldie Moonraker had this aha moment after hearing a friend describe her adoration for her husband.
Oh.
It made her realize she didn't feel that same level of adoration for her own spouse.
Comparisons can be tricky, but they can also be illuminating. It's not about keeping up with the Joneses. It's about asking yourself, am I experiencing the kind of love and connection I truly desire?
Right, because what looks good on paper or on social media might not actually feel good in real life.
Right.
And sometimes real life throws you a curveball that exposes those cracks in the foundation, like what happened with You Imaginary Fee 4420.
Oh, okay.
They said the pandemic was a breaking point for them being forced to work from home with their spouse 24/7,
Uh,
made them realize they couldn't do it anymore.
the pandemic was a pressure cooker for a lot of couples. It forced them to confront their compatibility in ways they hadn't anticipated.
And for some, it was the final straw, like
Yeah.
crisis dancing who discovered their spouse had a hidden gambling problem when their tax refund went missing.
Oh, no.
Talk about a betrayal of trust.
Absolutely. Financial issues are one of the leading causes of stress in relationships.
All right.
And when there's a lack of transparency, it can erode the foundation of trust completely.
So it's not always the big dramatic blowouts. Sometimes it's the slow drip, drip, trip of deceit or disappointment that eventually wears away at the relationship.
Exactly. And that's what we'll be exploring further. Those subtle signs, those moments of quiet disillusionment that can be just as powerful as the big dramatic ones.
Stay with us. We'll be right back after a quick break.
Sounds good.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about those slow burns.
Yeah.
Those almost imperceptible shifts that can signal a relationship is off track.
Yeah. You know, one Reddit user, Inkwell Jade,
Described this feeling perfectly. They said that on their honeymoon, while surrounded by other blissful couples, they found themselves wondering, when will it be my turn to feel that?
oh, wow.
It's like they knew something was missing even in those early days.
That's a powerful image, feeling like an outsider looking in on your own honeymoon. It speaks to the disconnect between expectation and reality.
It's like you're watching a movie about love, but you're not actually in it.
Yeah.
And speaking of feeling like a spectator, there's this story from a spunky goblin farts
Okay.
where their spouse actually admitted they wouldn't have gotten married if they'd known it would be like this.
Well, outright.
Talk about a truth bomb.
I wonder, though, what did, this mean for that person? Was it the day-to-day realities of marriage?
Right.
The loss of freedom? Or was it something deeper, a fundamental incompatibility they hadn't fully grasped before?
Good point. It seems like a lot of these stories touch on that feeling of being trapped,
Yeah.
stuck in a role they didn't audition for.
And that feeling of entrapment often manifests in symbolic actions. Remember Ularmed Milk, 81200? Yeah.
They talked about starting to stand at the edge of family photos, anticipating being cropped out later.
That's a gutting image. It's almost like they were rehearsing for their own exit. But sometimes the signs are even less obvious, like Daisy5915, who realized they couldn't even muster up fake excitement when asked about their anniversary plans.
That's interesting. The anniversary a day meant to celebrate love and commitment becomes a source of dread. It makes you wonder how many couples go through those motions,
Right.
marking time, but not truly connecting.
Do you think it's possible to miss those signs, or are they always there just below the surface?
I think it's a bit of both. We can be masters of self-deception,
Right.
especially when it comes to matters of the heart. But our bodies, our subconscious, they tend to tell the truth, even when our minds are busy rationalizing.
So those subtle feelings of unease, that growing sense of distance, those are worth paying attention to.
Absolutely. There are messages from our inner selves trying to guide us towards a more authentic life. Sometimes those messages come through loud and clear, like with Masmahawk.
Who described realizing their spouse treated them like a child.
Oh, wow.
They decided they didn't want to bring children into that dynamic.
Wow, that's a profound realization. It's like they suddenly saw the future they were creating and knew it wasn't what they wanted.
It's a powerful reminder that the choices we make in our relationships impact not just ourselves,
Right.
but also the next generation.
And sometimes it's less about specific behaviors and more about a fundamental mismatch in values or goals. Unlikely Cactus talked about feeling pressured to get married by their partner's family.
Okay.
They went through with the wedding, but eventually realized it wasn't the right decision.
The weight of family expectations. It's easy to get swept up in that tide, especially when you're younger
Right.
and perhaps less sure of your own path.
Right, it's like you're living someone else's script instead of writing your own story.
And that's what makes these Reddit stories so compelling. They're a reminder that even in the most intimate of relationships, self-discovery is an ongoing process. Sometimes it's a gradual unfolding, and sometimes it's a sudden jarring realization that the person you thought you knew, the life you thought you were building,
Right.
is no longer aligned with who you are.
It makes me wonder if we're all constantly evolving.
Yeah,
How do we ensure our relationships evolve alongside us?
that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think it starts with open and honest communication,
Mm-hmm.
a willingness to not just hear, but truly listen to our partners. And it requires a commitment to our own personal growth,
Right.
to continuously check in with ourselves and ask, am I happy? Am I fulfilled? And if not, what needs to change?
It's like that oxygen mask analogy, right? You have to take care of yourself first
Yeah.
before you can truly care for another.
Exactly. And that's what these stories ultimately teach us. Prioritizing our own well-being is not selfish.
Right.
It's essential. Whether that means staying in the marriage and working through those challenges, or making the difficult decision to leave honoring our own truth, is the key to living an authentic and fulfilling life.
Yeah. It's a lot to unpack, isn't it? These stories are so raw and honest,
Yeah.
and they really make you think about the choices we make in our own lives.
They do, and it's easy to get caught up in the drama, the who did what to whom. But what I find most fascinating is the resilience
Right?
these Redditors demonstrate. They chose to confront uncomfortable truths, to prioritize their own well-being, even when it meant going against societal expectations or disappointing loved ones.
That takes a lot of strength, especially in a culture that often equates staying in a marriage no matter what
Right.
with commitment and loyalty.
Right. And let's be clear, there's no shame in seeking help, whether it's therapy support groups or confiding in trusted friends and family. Sometimes we need an outside perspective to help us see our own patterns, our own blind spots.
It's like that saying, you can't read the label from inside the jar. Sometimes we need someone to hold up a mirror and say, hey, this is what I see.
Exactly. And it's not about assigning blame. It's about understanding the underlying dynamics, the unmet needs, the unspoken expectations that can lead to those moments of disillusionment.
So what does all this mean for our listeners who are tuning in today? Maybe some are relating to these stories on a deeply personal level. Maybe others are simply fascinated by the complexities of human relationships. Wherever you fall on that spectrum, what's the takeaway here?
I think the biggest takeaway is the importance of self-awareness.
Okay.
Are you truly happy in your relationship? Are your needs being met? Are you able to be your authentic self without fear of judgment or rejection?
Those are big questions, and I imagine for some people the answers might be uncomfortable.
They might be, but discomfort can be a catalyst for growth. If something feels off, if there's a nagging sense of unease, don't ignore it. Explore it. Talk to your partner. Seek professional guidance if needed.
It's about advocating for your own happiness, right? Not settling for a lukewarm existence because it's comfortable or expected.
Precisely. And remember, change is possible. Relationships can evolve, they can heal, but it requires a willingness from both parties to put in the work to communicate honestly and to prioritize each other's well-being.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Reddit rabbit hole, what's the one thought you want to leave our listeners with?
I'd say this. You deserve a love that nourishes your soul, that celebrates your individuality, that inspires you to grow and evolve. Don't be afraid to ask for what you need to set boundaries, to walk away from anything that diminishes your sense of self-worth.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey. We'll be back next week with a brand new deep dive exploring another fascinating corner of the human experience. Until then, take care and be kind to yourselves.